So you remember when pundits and pollsters alike presumed Donald Trump was running a fool's errand? While few thought he stood a chance against the establishment machine, one New York Post columnist had this to say, quote, "What if Trump's outrageousness truly captures America's current cultural climate by giving a voice to the voiceless, folks drowned out by the drumbeat of social justice warriors?" Well, 6 months later, here we are with the president-elect, quote, refusing to obey the rules of conventional identity politics and a tsunami of backlash from the social justice movement. In fact, just yesterday, the CEO of Grubhub, Matt Maloney, he sent a company-wide email insinuating that employees who agreed with Donald Trump's rhetoric should immediately resign. Well, joining me, the man who penned that New York Post column is David Kaufman. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right, so the social justice warriors have gone nuts in the last 72 hours.
They have.
You've got CEOs threatening his employees. You've got protests and riots breaking out throughout the country. You've got people like Aaron Sorkin writing, profanity-laced letters to their 15-year-old daughters about the evil monster that's going to next inhabit the White House. But we've been at their mercy for a long time, haven't we?
I would say that there's the cultural climate in general has been, I don't want to say taken over, but dramatically informed by the various social justice movements that are out there right now, whether they're about race or gender or sexual orientation. All of identity politics has really come to dominate and really, in a way, define what is considered appropriate or inappropriate cultural conversation.
Right. So Harry Reid puts out a letter today, and I left it in the office, but it just more or less was saying, hey, we're going to stand, we're not going to let Donald Trump bully women, blacks, Hispanics, LGBT.
Right.
In other words, your typical list of quote-unquote victims.
Right.
And for me, I always see it as their way of keeping power. In other words, it's not something, listen, you're the victims, these are the bad guys, and we're the only ones who can save you.
Well, obviously, when it comes to identity politics, the subject is much broader than that. And I think that's what's really going to have to happen now. What you have had before is a very narrow definition of who gets to play that game. Somebody gets to say, you are able to be part of this conversation, you're able to claim victimhood or perpetratorhood, and other people are not. I think what's going to have to happen now is going to be a broader definition of who gets to claim a seat at this table, what does this table look like, and what will the conversation be had at this table. And I think that's what Donald Trump is really saying, is that folks in middle America, folks who are white, who are poor, who are not working, who are undereducated, they also deserve a voice in this conversation about victimhood or not victimhood. They also deserve a voice in this conversation about identity politics. And he gave them that voice.
Well, what about the notion that these so-called victims of the system, or whatever it might be, if you want to say capitalism run amok, or cronyism run amok, or progressivism run amok, that they don't have to necessarily be identified by race or gender in the first place?
I think that is not necessarily going to work. I think at the end of the day, folks are always going to self-identify. We live in a tribal nation, and we've always lived in a tribal nation. That's
so how do you unite a tribal nation like that, particularly when you have these loud voices on the social justice side that are always looking for social justice, that were angrier the day after we elected a black president than the day before?
Okay, so your question is how do you shift that paradigm? Obviously, I think that what you're going to have to do is make way for different voices in that conversation. I think what's going to have to happen is that the folks who have traditionally been at the forefront of social justice movements are now having to take stock, having to realize that for the last year or two, 3 years, they've had front and center within the media to air their grievances, to promote their agenda, an agenda which, and for many people, it's very much valid and correct. But at the same time, that agenda has drowned out other voices. That agenda has said to other people, you cannot be part of this conversation. The agenda has said to other people that you have to obey by our rules. A big part of the social justice movement, in my opinion, is about saying who gets to speak. And what they're going to have to do now, I think, is broaden that paradigm. And
well, that was made quite clear on Tuesday night, right? I mean,
it wasn't just made clear. It was a directive. It wasn't made. It was a directive. It was a moment where people who have felt silenced, and more importantly, people who have felt shamed. I think that's one of the key things I spoke about in my piece, is that a large segment of this country that hasn't had a voice has been made to feel shame, has been made to feel diminished because they might not necessarily agree with a larger cultural conversation. And now they're coming out of that moment and say, we want to be part of this conversation,
right.
and we demand, and we are going to dominate this conversation if we have to. And we've done so by electing a president that we feel supports our views.
In the meantime, the tolerant left has become, or shown to be themselves, very intolerant. Dave, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.